The ground was shifting beneath him. New technologies, new expectations, new market demands. Everything he had built seemed to be in flux. What worked yesterday was irrelevant today. The rules were being rewritten in real time, and there he stood, at the edge of all that change, facing the hardest question any leader must eventually confront. How do you evolve without losing yourself? Because it would have been easy to adapt completely, to chase every trend, to mirror every new demand, to reshape his leadership to fit whatever the world applauded at that moment. But something deep inside resisted, a voice that said, adapt your tactics, yes. Adjust your strategies, absolutely. But do not trade your soul for survival, because there's a difference between flexibility and surrender, between evolving with intelligence and abandoning the core of who you are. Leadership isn't about standing still while the world changes. It's about moving forward without letting the current carry away your convictions. In a time when speed is worshipped, when reinvention is demanded at every turn, it's easy to forget that real leadership is not just about movement, it's about movement with meaning. It's about staying anchored even as you sail into new waters. It's about knowing that tactics may change, but values must endure. Today, we're diving into that hidden dimension of leadership, the part no one applauds in the short term, but everyone respects in the long run. The art of staying adaptive on the outside while staying unbreakable on the inside. Because true leadership isn't about resisting change, it's about embodying your values so deeply that no amount of change can erase them. And when you learn how to lead from that place, you don't just survive the change, you shape it. There's a dangerous illusion many leaders fall into during times of change, the illusion that to stay relevant, you must become whatever the world demands. That adaptation requires abandonment. That flexibility demands forgetting. That evolution justifies erasing the foundations you once stood on. But that's not true leadership. That's survival instinct hijacking your mission. Because true adaptation is not about dissolving your identity to match every new context. It's about adjusting your approach while protecting your core. It's the discipline of changing what needs to change without compromising what must endure. Leaders who chase every trend, who reinvent themselves with every new pressure, may appear agile, but underneath, they become hollow, disconnected from any deeper narrative, driven by external noise rather than internal compass. Easy to sway, easy to break, easy to forget, because in the end, people don't follow you because you're fast to adapt. They follow you because you stand for something real, something they can trust when the ground shakes. Adaptation without conviction is just drift. Adaptation rooted in values, that's leadership. I've seen leaders lose everything, not because they didn't change fast enough, but because they changed so completely. They left behind the very essence that made them worth following. They traded trust for trendiness, influence for insecurity, legacy for immediate relevance. And in doing so, they lost not just their teams, but themselves. True leadership is learning how to evolve your methods without eroding your meaning, to innovate on the outside while staying anchored on the inside, because your greatest asset during times of change isn't how well you imitate the new, it's how clearly you embody the timeless. So the next time you feel the pressure to adapt, ask yourself, am I evolving to better express my values, or am I abandoning them to survive another day? Because survival at the cost of your soul is not leadership, it's just slow defeat. When everything around you shifts, your strategies must evolve, your plans must adjust, your timelines must flex, your methods must innovate, but your values, they must anchor you. Because in the chaos of change, when certainty disappears and familiar markers vanish, your values become your true north. They are not optional, they are not decorative. They are the non negotiable commitments that remind you and everyone around you who you are, even when everything else feels uncertain. Without strategic anchors, leadership becomes reactive. You get pulled by every trend, you chase every voice, you drift into whatever feels urgent at the moment. But when you lead anchored by clear values, change doesn't destabilize you, it sharpens you. You adjust your tactics without losing your truth. You modify your delivery without compromising your direction. You respond to reality without betraying your reason for existing. I've seen leaders navigate devastating market shifts without collapsing. Why? Because while they adapted their operations, they fiercely protected their core principles: integrity in every deal, respect in every decision, purpose in every pivot. Their teams followed them not because they promised certainty, but because they embodied consistency. When the ground was moving, their people needed someone who wouldn't, someone who could absorb change without becoming unrecognizable. That's what values do. They anchor your leadership in something deeper than trends, profits, or survival. They allow you to say, yes, we're evolving. Yes, we're adjusting. But who we are, what we stand for, that remains untouched. And that consistency becomes your greatest competitive advantage because people don't just follow ideas, they follow trust. And trust is born when your words, your actions, and your values stay aligned, even under pressure, especially under pressure. So, as the world changes, and it will, ask yourself, what are the principles I will never bargain with? What is the essence of my leadership that no external shift will ever rewrite? Because leaders who move without anchors may ride the waves for a moment, but leaders who move with anchors, they survive the storm and they emerge stronger on the other side. Flexibility is essential, but flexibility without identity is just drift. If you bend too much without a center, you break. If you adjust without direction, you lose yourself long before you lose your position. So, how do you stay flexible without becoming unrecognizable? It starts with understanding what can change and what must never change. Your tactics, flexible, your strategies, adaptable, your branding, your timelines, your methods, evolving. But your principles, your mission, your definition of integrity, those are non negotiable. They are the bones of your leadership. To stay flexible without losing yourself, you have to ask better questions. Will this adjustment serve the mission or just the moment? Am I bending to adapt or bending to please? Will this change help us express our values more powerfully or dilute them for the sake of convenience? Flexibility without these questions becomes erosion, but flexibility guided by clarity becomes evolution. It's the difference between survival and true leadership. I've watched leaders pivot entire business models while keeping their soul intact. They changed how they served, but not why they served. They changed the markets they targeted, but not the kind of impact they wanted to make. They changed the methods they used, but never traded their core principles for short term wins. That's strategic flexibility. That's the kind of leadership that endures. It's not about being stubborn. It's not about resisting every change. It's about knowing who you are so deeply that you can move with the times without being moved by every passing trend. You can evolve in ways that make you sharper, more effective, more relevant, without becoming someone you don't recognize when you look in the mirror. So the next time change demands a decision, remember, flexibility is strength, but only if it's anchored in identity. Adapt the strategy, adapt the methods, adapt the delivery, but never adapt your soul because the world needs leaders who can move with it without being consumed by it, leaders who can flex without falling apart, leaders who can change everything they need to except what truly matters. Not every wave of change should be embraced, and not every wave should be resisted. The art of leadership is knowing the difference. Because if you move with every current, you lose your way. But if you resist every current, you lose your relevance. The leaders who endure, who lead through storms instead of being crushed by them, learn how to read the moment. They ask, is this change an opportunity to express our mission more powerfully? Or is it a temptation to abandon who we are for the sake of fitting in? Change demands action when it helps you align more deeply with your purpose. Change demands resistance when it demands you betray your core. It's that simple and that hard because the pressure is real. The pressure to conform, the pressure to pivot faster than your principles can follow, the pressure to stay relevant even if it means becoming something you never intended to be. But real leadership isn't about reacting to pressure. It's about responding to truth. When a new technology emerges, when a market shifts, when expectations evolve, you move, yes, you adapt, you innovate. But when the change asks you to abandon your integrity, when it asks you to dilute your mission, when it demands you become unrecognizable just to survive, that's when you plant your feet. That's when you say, with calm and conviction, we will evolve. We will listen, we will grow, but we will not sell our soul to buy another quarter, another deal, another applause. I've seen leaders make that choice. I've seen them walk away from opportunities because the cost to their values was too high. I've seen them withstand criticism, loss, isolation, because they understood that protecting the core was more important than pleasing the crowd. And you know what happened? They didn't just survive, they became rare. And in becoming rare, they became trusted. And in becoming trusted, they became unforgettable. So the next time change knocks on your door, don't just ask, how do we adapt? Ask, is this a change that strengthens who we are? Or is it a change that threatens who we are? And lead accordingly. Because leadership isn't about always saying yes to change. It's about knowing when the greatest act of courage is to say no. You can adapt strategies all day long. You can innovate your products, refresh your brand, restructure your teams. But if your culture fractures during change, you lose everything. Because culture isn't what you write on the walls, it's what people feel and carry, especially when the pressure hits. And during times of change, your culture is tested. The promises become noise if they're not backed by consistent actions. The values become cliches if they're not rooted in decisions. The mission becomes hollow if it's compromised the first time things get hard. So, how do you build a culture that honors values through change? You lead by example, first, last, always. You don't just tell people that integrity matters, you show them in how you negotiate deals, even under pressure. You don't just announce that respect is a value, you model it when disagreements surface and tensions rise. You embed the values in the small, daily decisions: who gets promoted and why, how you handle mistakes and whether you own them or bury them, what you reward and what you quietly tolerate. Because your team learns far more from what you live than from what you say. In moments of change, people are watching closer than ever. They're asking silently, do the values still matter when the stakes are higher? Will leadership bend the mission to chase a quick win? Is this culture just a performance? Or is it real when it costs something? The cultures that survive and thrive through massive shifts are the ones where the answers to those questions are clear, where people know, yes, we are adapting, yes, we are evolving, but no, we are not trading our soul for survival. The greatest gift you can give your team during change is not just a brilliant new strategy, it's the reassurance that no matter how the tactics evolve, the heart of who you are and who you are together remains untouchable. Because in a world where everything feels uncertain, a culture rooted in real values becomes a sanctuary. It becomes the reason people stay when they could leave. It becomes the reason people trust when everything else feels shaky. It becomes the invisible force that carries you, not just through one change, but through every season that follows. So build that culture, protect it, nourish it, because in the end, strategies come and go. But the cultures that honor their values through change, they become unstoppable. Change is inevitable. It will come faster than you expect. It will test every assumption you've built. It will stretch every system you trusted. But in the face of all that movement, you have a choice. You can be the leader who drifts, who bends at every gust of pressure, who forgets what truly matters the moment it gets inconvenient. Or you can be the leader who adapts with wisdom, without ever abandoning your core. The leader who moves with change but doesn't become its prisoner. The leader who evolves strategies but protects the soul of the mission. The leader who adjusts tactics without ever losing the meaning behind them. True leadership is not about staying the same, it's about staying true. True to the vision that called you, true to the values that ground you, true to the people who trust you to hold something deeper than just today's trend. Because when you lead like that, you don't just survive change, you shape it. You lead your team not just through uncertainty, but toward clarity. You build organizations that don't just react, but reinvent with integrity. You create legacies that don't just adapt to the future, they define it. So here's your call: move, adapt, grow, but do it without ever trading the heart of who you are. Because in a world obsessed with speed, flash, and surface level success, the rarest and most needed leaders are the ones who can move fast without losing depth, the ones who flow like rivers, powerful, flexible, relentless, but always flowing from a source that never runs dry. Led like that. And no matter how much the world changes, you'll always know exactly who you are. And so will everyone who chooses to follow you.